If you ever wanted to see the difference between the winners and the forgotten, you only had to visit the Carter auction barn on Derby Week. Beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers and spotlights, Kentucky's richest and boldest gathered in their tailored suits and sparkling dresses, waving numbered paddles with the same bored confidence they used to order caviar. Tonight, the scent of hay mixed with perfume and money. Richard Carter, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, stood at the center like a general inspecting his troops, flanked by nervous assistants and an entourage of sycophants. Richard didn't even bother to sit. He moved between the stalls like he owned every inch, because in a way he did. "That one's got good legs," he said, barely glancing at a gray stallion that twitched nervously under the gaze of so many strangers. "Get him prepped for the parade. I want him in my colors by next month." His words sliced through the air, each decision final, every gesture full of purpose. The auctioneer, eyes shining with dollar signs, nodded and called out another number. But there was one stall that nobody lingered near. In the dim shadows at the far end, separated from the prize yearlings and the blue-blooded mares, stood Rusty. His copper-red coat had faded to something like old pennies, and the scars on his knees told stories nobody wanted to hear. Once his name had rung out across the Kentucky Derby stands, and the roar had been for him. Rusty, the champion, the miracle. Now he was little more than an afterthought, an aging gelding taking up space and draining resources. Richard barely slowed as he passed Rusty's stall. He caught a whiff of liniment, saw the sunken lines around the horse's eyes, and sneered. "How much are we wasting on this one?" he asked, not expecting an answer. His assistant, Grant, fumbled with a tablet. "Well, with feed and meds, plus staff," Richard cut him off with a wave. "He's costing us money. Find a way to get rid of him. Auction him. Give him away. I don't care. Just make him disappear." A silence fell over the stable for a moment. It wasn't just the words, but the way Richard said them, as if Rusty was nothing but a broken piece of equipment, as if the champion's glory days had never mattered. Grant's gaze flickered uneasily to the horse, who watched them both with steady, wounded eyes. After the last horse had been paraded, the barn cleared out in a flurry of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rumble of trucks carrying away new acquisitions. The crew swept up the debris, discarded catalogs, champagne corks, muddy footprints, but nobody noticed the lone figure in a faded hoodie standing by Rusty's stall after midnight. Tim was the new stablehand, too quiet and too skinny to stand out among the tough old ranch hands. He'd been hired mostly to muck stalls and keep out of the way. Tim's hand hovered over the latch. The barn was nearly silent, except for the gentle shifting of hooves and the occasional snort from a restless horse. Tim's heart pounded as he slipped inside Rusty's stall. He wasn't supposed to be here after hours. If Richard or Grant caught him, he'd be out on his ear. But something about Rusty's quiet, proud sadness got to him. The old horse stood as if waiting for judgment, too tired to care what came next. "Hey, buddy," Tim whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. He fished a crumpled apple from his jacket pocket, rubbing it on his sleeve before offering it. Rusty hesitated, then reached out with surprising gentleness, his lips warm against Tim's palm. "You're not done yet, old boy. Not if I can help it." Tim worked slowly, brushing the dust from Rusty's coat, picking straw from his tail, cleaning out the old water bucket. He talked, because it felt less lonely that way, telling Rusty about his own second-hand life, about the parents who'd left, the foster homes, the jobs that never lasted. Rusty listened, or at least stood there without flinching, and that was enough. For the first time since Tim arrived, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But not everyone slept easy that night. In the Carter mansion up the hill, Richard poured himself a drink and gazed out his window, the auction catalog in his hand. His reflection in the glass looked tired, even cruel, but he didn't care. Winning was all that mattered. Horses, people. It was all about the numbers, the trophies, the headlines. He finished his drink in one gulp, already planning tomorrow's moves. Back in the barn, Tim lingered just a little longer, listening to the rain pattering on the roof. He pressed his forehead gently to Rusty's neck. "I don't know how, but I'm going to help you, I promise." In that moment, a crack of thunder made Rusty jump, and Tim startled too, clutching the horse's mane. They both stood there, hearts racing, holding on to each other as the world outside raged. In the darkness, a spark of hope flickered, small, almost invisible, but real. And if anyone had been watching, they might have seen the ghost of a champion shining in Rusty's eyes, just waiting for someone to believe. The night stretched on, but for Tim and Rusty, something had shifted. The world might have written them off, but the story wasn't over yet. The next few days at Carter Ranch moved in a blur of routine and tension. While the big money colts got all the attention, Tim learned how to move unnoticed, slipping from stall to stall with his pitchfork and bucket, head down, mouth shut. The veteran stable hands paid him little mind, grumbling about the mess from the auction and speculating which new horses would make the next fortune. But every night, after the last light in the house on the hill went out, Tim waited and watched. He made sure the others were asleep or gone. Then he crept back into the barn, flashlight wrapped in an old t-shirt to keep the beam from drawing notice. Rusty was always awake, as if waiting for Tim's return. At first, Tim thought maybe the old horse just didn't sleep, haunted by memories of roaring crowds and the sharp crack of the starter pistol. Or maybe he was just lonely, left behind when the world moved on. Whatever it was, their late-night meetings became the highlight of Tim's day. He brought little gifts, a carrot swiped from the kitchen, a faded towel to rub down Rusty's aching shoulders, a handful of oats kept in a coffee can under his cot. He started talking more, telling Rusty about the horses he'd cared for back in Indiana, about the one-eyed gelding that taught him patience, about the mean old mare who'd kicked him and broke his arm. Rusty listened, ears twitching, sometimes nudging Tim with his nose as if urging him to go on. One night, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the tin roof and wind rattling the doors. Tim found Rusty pacing his stall, eyes wild, sweat streaking his face even in the chill. Tim didn't hesitate. He slipped inside, closed the stall door behind him, and pressed his hands gently against the horse's neck. "Easy, boy. It's just a storm. You've seen worse." Rusty trembled, but after a while his breathing slowed. Tim stayed with him, whispering nonsense, his own fear melting away as he focused on calming Rusty. As the days turned into weeks, Tim's secret routine grew bolder. He started sneaking out early in the mornings too, when the mist was still low and the fields smelled like wet earth. He led Rusty, shuffling and stiff, out of his stall, down the back lane to the small paddock behind the barn, out of sight from the mansion and the road. There, Tim let Rusty graze while he sat on the fence, legs dangling, humming old country songs he half remembered from childhood. He brushed Rusty's coat, untangling the knots and picking the burrs out of his mane. He whispered to him about the races they'd never run together, about the kind of second chances no one expected. Sometimes he just sat quietly, letting the silence speak for both of them. One evening, while cleaning Rusty's hooves, Tim spotted a patch of raw skin. He winced. "They've been ignoring you, huh?" "Figures." He slipped into the tack room, searching through bottles and jars until he found a tin of salve. He rubbed it in gently, blowing on the sore spot, murmuring, "You're gonna feel better soon. Promise." That night, as he locked up the barn, Grant appeared out of nowhere, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Tim froze, pulse pounding. "You working late, new kid?" Grant asked, voice oily. Tim fumbled for an excuse, muttering something about double-checking the stalls. Grant stared at him for a long, tense moment. "Don't get too attached to any of these horses. They come and go. Do your job. Keep your head down." He walked away, boots crunching in the gravel, but Tim felt the threat hanging in the air long after he was gone. Tim knew the risk he was taking. If Richard found out he was wasting time on an old, worthless horse, he'd be out on the street, maybe worse. But something in Rusty's eyes made it impossible to quit. Every time he looked at the old gelding, he saw dignity that couldn't be bought or sold, a fire that refused to go out. One night, Tim knelt by Rusty's stall, head resting against the wooden rail. "You're not done yet, old boy. I swear it. I'm not letting them send you away. We'll figure something out." Rusty snorted softly, almost like a laugh. Tim smiled, feeling a weird kind of hope bloom in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he let himself imagine a future. One where Rusty wasn't just another casualty of the business, but a living, breathing champion with more to give. Then came the night that changed everything. Tim, unable to sleep, crept into the barn after midnight. He found Rusty lying down, sides heaving, eyes closed. Panic seized him. No, come on, buddy!" He rushed inside, kneeling by the horse's head, stroking his face. "Don't give up! Please don't!" Minutes passed. Then Rusty finally rolled to his feet, shaky but upright. Tim let out a shaky laugh. "Scared me to death, old man. But you're tougher than you look." On impulse, Tim pulled out his phone and took a photo. Rusty's face in the half-light, proud and stubborn and alive. He posted it online, anonymous, a caption underneath, "Champions never quit. Sometimes they just need a friend." He had no idea if anyone would see it or care. But as he settled in the hay beside Rusty that night, he felt something shift. The line between lost causes and miracles blurred. He wasn't just caring for a forgotten horse. He was fighting for his own second chance, too. And in the quiet darkness, Tim promised, "You and me, Rusty. I'm not giving up. I'll show them what you're made of, even if it's the last thing I do." Morning came, painting gold across the paddocks. Tim stretched, back aching, and watched Rusty munch clover as the ranch woke up. There was danger ahead. Richard's orders, Grant's suspicion, the ever-present risk of discovery. But for now, there was also hope. And that was enough to keep going. Sunrise came quietly to the back paddocks of Carter Ranch. The sky painted soft blue and pink over a line of dew-sparkled grass. By the time the house on the hill flickered awake, Tim was already moving, boots squishing in the wet grass, pockets bulging with carrots and apples he'd squirreled away from the kitchen. It had become his secret mission. Every day, before the ranch was fully awake, Tim led Rusty out through a side gate, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of Grant and the ranch manager. Rusty's steps were still stiff, his muscles slow to warm up, but there was a cautious new energy in his stride. Tim had read somewhere that hope could move mountains, and every morning he wondered if it could mend tired bones too. He led Rusty around the paddock in slow, gentle circles, never forcing him, always watching for signs of pain or fatigue. Sometimes he talked, low and easy. "That's it, big guy. Nice and steady." Sometimes he just walked in silence, matching the horse's pace, listening to the quiet clop of hooves and the breeze through the fence rails. Tim became a student of recovery. After work, he visited the local library, scouring shelves for anything he could find about horse care, therapy, and rehabilitation. He borrowed battered books on equine therapy, read magazine articles about horses helping veterans and children with disabilities, and filled his notebook with ideas and questions. He learned about joint wraps, gentle stretching, the healing power of touch and routine. He scribbled late into the night by flashlight, pages full of sketches and notes. His new obsession gave him courage. Every day, he tried something new. A longer walk, a different brushstroke, new stretches he'd learned from a musty old book. He even hummed country songs while he worked. And soon enough, Rusty would angle an ear toward him, almost as if he was listening. The first breakthrough came on a morning after rain, the paddocks muddy and shining under the sunrise. Tim noticed Rusty reaching for a patch of clover just beyond his usual reach. With gentle encouragement, Tim led him a few extra steps. Rusty's nostrils flared, but he didn't flinch. Tim knelt, rubbing his neck. "That's it, champ. You still got it." He felt a surge of pride, and for a second he glimpsed the champion Rusty once was. Some afternoons, when the main barn was empty and most of the crew was napping or gone to town, Tim set up a small obstacle course with buckets and cones he found behind the hayshed. He led Rusty through it, step by careful step. At first, Rusty hesitated, but as the days went by, the old gelding's confidence returned. His steps more sure, his eyes brighter. Tim started keeping track in a dog-eared notebook. Day 7, walked the cones, no limping, ate all his breakfast. Good mood. With each small victory, Tim's own confidence grew. He started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could pull off something bigger. In the evenings, as he brushed out Rusty's coat and untangled his mane, he'd find himself sharing his wildest hopes aloud. Imagine, Rusty, you helping kids one day, not just winning trophies, changing lives. I read about therapy programs in California and Texas. You'd be great at that. Rusty, as always, just listened, steady and calm. But Tim swore the old horse stood a little taller now, his gaze more direct. Still, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Tim knew if Richard or Grant discovered what he was doing, the dream would end fast. Sometimes, as he led Rusty back to his stall, he'd glance over his shoulder, expecting to see Grant's shadow lurking or Richard's cold stare through the office window. He became a master of timing, slipping through the barn during shift changes, tucking away evidence, making sure Rusty's grooming and meds looked routine on the stable chart. The routine began to draw notice from others in subtle ways. One of the older stable hands, Maria, stopped Tim outside the feed room. "You spend a lot of time with that old nag," she said, arching an eyebrow. "He teaching you anything?" Tim hesitated, then shrugged. "Patience, maybe. Loyalty." Maria grunted, but there was a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Horses remember. You treat 'em right. They don't forget." Tim started dreaming at night. Visions of Rusty running through open fields, free and strong, children laughing as they rode on his back, Richard smiling with pride instead of scorn. The dreams made him wake with hope, even as the weight of secrecy pressed on him. Then, one afternoon, as Tim was leading Rusty through the paddock, a family passed by on the far side of the fence, a young mom and her daughter, who was using a walker. The girl stopped, watching Rusty with wide eyes. Tim waved, and on impulse led Rusty over to the fence. The girl giggled as Rusty nuzzled her hand through the rails. "He's so soft," she whispered, eyes shining. Something in Tim's chest broke open. He crouched, talking softly to the girl, letting her stroke Rusty's nose. "He's a champion," Tim said, "and he's got a big heart." The mother smiled, a hint of tears in her eyes. We needed this, she said, almost to herself. That night, Tim wrote in his notebook, Rusty could help people, not just me, everyone. The secret bond between man and horse was changing them both. Rusty was coming back to life, one gentle step at a time. And for the first time since he'd arrived at Carter Ranch, Tim felt like maybe he belonged too. Not just as a worker, but as someone who could make a difference. Yet beneath the hope, the fear lingered. If Richard found out, but Tim pushed it away. For now, there was healing and trust, and the feeling that they were moving towards something bigger, and that was enough to keep going. One day, one step, one small miracle at a time. Sometimes hope needs a little help to grow, and sometimes it shows up in places no one expects. That spring, with Carter Ranch humming in the background like a restless hive, Tim's hope for Rusty was quietly blossoming into something bigger, something he couldn't keep to himself any longer. It started with a newspaper clipping. Tim was shelving books at the library after his shift when an article caught his eye. Horse therapy program gives disabled kids new confidence. The photos showed children in wheelchairs brushing an old gray horse, their smiles as bright as the Kentucky sun. The story stuck with him for days, gnawing at his insides, until he finally summoned the courage to do something bold. He remembered Maria mentioning a children's physical therapist who worked with kids in the next town over, a woman named Miss Hernandez. According to Maria, she was smart, kind, and tough as nails, someone who believed in the healing power of animals. The very next morning, after double-checking the barn was empty and Rusty was brushed and calm, Tim slipped away to a corner of the property where he could get a decent phone signal. He dialed the number with shaking fingers. The call was awkward at first. Tim wasn't used to asking for favors, and he didn't even know how to explain what he wanted. Hi, my name's Tim. I work at Carter Ranch. There's this horse, Rusty. I think he could help kids maybe if someone just gave him a chance. For a moment he expected to be brushed off or told he was wasting her time. But Miss Hernandez listened quietly, asking careful questions, her voice warm but professional. Is the horse gentle? Does he like people? Are you willing to help me assess him? When Tim answered yes to everything, she agreed to visit, on the strict condition it stayed quiet. I don't want to step on any toes with your boss. We'll make it unofficial, just a visit, all right? The following Saturday, before the sun fully crested the trees, Tim waited by the back gate, nerves jangling. Miss Hernandez arrived in a battered minivan, unloading a bag of apples and a well-worn medical tote. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, her brown eyes quick and observant. She looked Tim up and down, then smiled. You must be Tim. You look more nervous than my youngest patient. Tim led her to Rusty's paddock, explaining everything along the way. Rusty's history, the decline, the secret walks and gentle rehab. He's got heart, ma'am. Just needs someone to believe in him. Miss Hernandez knelt by the fence, watching Rusty with a practiced eye as he ambled over, sniffing curiously at her hand. She offered an apple slice, then quietly inspected his legs, murmuring encouragement. You're right, she said after a while, voice low. This horse has soul. He's still got a job left in him. The next part took more courage than Tim thought he had. Miss Hernandez asked if she could bring a child client to visit, just to see how Rusty responded. Her name is Emily. She's been struggling lately, stopped talking after her accident. Maybe a little magic is what she needs. They planned everything in secret. On a quiet afternoon when most of the ranch staff was off for the county fair, Miss Hernandez returned with Emily and her mother. Emily was 8, small for her age, with dark curls and wide, wary eyes. She sat in a wheelchair, hands twisting nervously in her lap. Tim kept his voice soft, introducing Rusty as an old champion who needed a friend. Miss Hernandez explained what would happen, then stood back as Emily's mother wheeled her close to the paddock fence. Rusty watched the girl for a moment, then stepped forward, lowering his big, gentle head. Emily hesitated, then reached out, trembling. Rusty nuzzled her hand, his breath warm on her skin. Something in Emily's face shifted. A tiny, uncertain smile flickered, then grew. She giggled, just a little, a sound like the first notes of a song after silence. Tim blinked hard, swallowing the lump in his throat. Miss Hernandez shot him a grin. "That's it, Rusty. Nice and easy." Emily reached up, giggling again as Rusty's whiskers tickled her palm. She whispered something, too soft to hear. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She hasn't laughed like that in months. For the next hour, Tim and Miss Hernandez watched as Emily brushed Rusty's neck, talking to him in a shy, secret voice. Rusty stood still and calm, patient as a saint. By the time the visit ended, Emily was beaming, asking when she could come back. Miss Hernandez winked at Tim. "I think we've found ourselves a natural." Word spread quietly among Tim's small circle of friends, Maria, who helped cover for him during his secret outings, and a few others who'd noticed Rusty's transformation. They began to see the old horse as more than just a relic or a burden. The barn felt lighter, as if hope itself was moving through the rafters, but there was always the threat of Richard finding out. Every time Tim heard footsteps outside the paddock, his heart jumped. He lived in fear of Grant's sharp questions or Richard's cold eyes catching a glimpse of Emily's visits. "We have to be careful," he warned Miss Hernandez after one session. She nodded, understanding. "Sometimes the best things start in secret, Tim. But eventually, the truth comes out." That night, Tim sat on a hay bale, Rusty's head in his lap. He watched Emily's mother drive away. Tears and laughter mixed on her cheeks. For the first time, Tim truly believed they were on the verge of something important. Not just for Rusty, but for everyone who needed a little extra hope. He whispered to Rusty, "You did good, buddy. Real good. We're just getting started." The barn was quiet, but the world felt full of possibility. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle breathing of horses and the fading light, Tim let himself dream of a future where kindness, patience, and a little courage could change everything. Nothing that good could stay hidden forever. For a few precious weeks, Tim lived in a bubble of hope, keeping Rusty's secret therapy sessions tucked deep in his chest, sharing the load only with Miss Hernandez and the tiny circle of friends who dared to believe. But on a Thursday morning just before sunrise, that fragile world shattered. Tim was leading Rusty back from the far paddock, humming quietly, the old horse's halter slung loosely over his shoulder. He'd gotten careless, a little too comfortable with the routine, a little too sure that nobody paid attention to anything but the blue blood colts in the main barn. The sky was streaked pink, dew still heavy on the grass, and Tim's boots left muddy tracks down the lane. He turned the corner by the equipment shed and nearly dropped Rusty's lead rope. Standing by the gate, arms crossed and eyes blazing, was Richard Carter. Grant was there too, face drawn and nervous, his gaze flickering from Tim to the billionaire and back. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip, shattering the silence. Tim froze, heart slamming in his chest. Rusty shifted behind him, sensing the sudden danger. I was just walking him, sir," Tim stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. Walking him. At dawn. Out of sight of the main barn. Richard's glare could have cut glass. Don't insult my intelligence. I've been hearing things, Tim. Little whispers about you sneaking around, about visitors who aren't on my schedule. Tim swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at him to run, to lie, to do anything but tell the truth. But he thought of Emily's laughter, the way Rusty's eyes had brightened in the last few weeks, and he straightened his shoulders. I brought a therapist out, sir, and a little girl. They just wanted to meet Rusty. He's gentle, he's good for them. Richard cut him off with a slash of his hand. Enough! I told Grant to get rid of this horse weeks ago. Instead, I find you turning my ranch into a petting zoo, behind my back. His face was red, veins bulging at his neck. Grant took a careful step back, clearly not eager to get caught in the crossfire. Tim fought to keep his voice from shaking. Rusty isn't just an old horse, sir. He's helping people, kids who need something to believe in. He's changed. I've seen it. Ask Miss Hernandez. Ask Emily's mom. Richard shook his head, jaw clenched. I don't care if he walks on water. He's costing me money. And you're costing me more by wasting my time. You were hired to muck stalls, not to start some charity case. I want this horse out of here by the end of the week. You hear me? Sell him. Give him away. I don't care how. And if I catch you defying me again, you can pack your things too. For a long moment, the only sound was Rusty's quiet snuffling, as if he knew his fate was being decided. Tim stared at the ground, rage and despair tangling in his gut. He couldn't let it end like this. Not after everything Rusty had done. Not after all the hope they'd built together. He took a shaky breath, forcing himself to look Richard in the eye. Please, sir, just give me 1 week. Let me show you what Rusty can really do. If he doesn't make a difference, I'll walk away, but give us a chance. Grant opened his mouth to say something, then thought better of it. Richard considered Tim for a long, tense moment, his face unreadable. Finally, with a snort of disgust, he waved his hand. You've got 1 week, that's it. If I see anything that makes this ranch look foolish, if I see anything that costs me money or reputation, you're both gone. Understand? Yes, sir, Tim said quietly, the relief almost making him dizzy. He watched Richard march away, barking orders into his phone, Grant trailing behind like a shadow. When they were finally out of sight, Tim sank down onto the nearest fence rail, head in his hands. Rusty came over, nudging his shoulder. Guess we've got a deadline, old boy, Tim whispered. It's now or never. He spent the rest of the day in a haze, planning and worrying and replaying Richard's words in his mind. Miss Hernandez called as soon as she heard. We can do this, Tim. We'll make it work. 1 week is enough. But the pressure was on. Every minute counted. Tim worked late into the night, cleaning the paddock, brushing Rusty until his coat gleamed, practicing the routines they'd learned. He called Maria, desperate for advice and backup. She showed up that evening, bringing apples and a look of grim determination. You just worry about the horse, kid. I'll help keep the others out of your way. By the end of the week, the barn was buzzing with rumors. Some of the hands were rooting for Tim, others betting against him, and the horses seemed to sense the tension, watching quietly as Tim rehearsed with Rusty, setting up makeshift obstacles, practicing gentle therapy routines he'd learned from books and Miss Hernandez. One night, exhausted and sore, Tim found himself in Rusty's stall, staring into the old horse's eyes. We can do this, he whispered. I believe in you. I need you to believe in me too. Outside, a storm was building, thunder rumbling over the fields. But inside the barn, there was only the steady sound of Rusty's breathing and the stubborn hope that somehow, against all odds, they'd find a way through. As the rain battered the roof and the deadline loomed, Tim clung to one thought. Miracles don't happen because you deserve them. They happen because you fight for them, even when the world tells you to quit. And this time he wasn't giving up. Tim barely slept the night before the big day. He lay awake on his narrow cot in the staff quarters, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling, mind racing through every detail. 1 week, he kept repeating. 1 week to show Richard Carter, the staff, and the world that Rusty was worth more than his racing trophies or his age. 1 week to prove that miracles didn't always come wrapped in blue ribbons. Before dawn, Tim was already up, nerves jangling as he moved quietly through the barn. He gave Rusty a careful grooming, his hands steady even as his thoughts whirled. "This is it, old boy. No holding back today." Rusty looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes, calm in the face of all the pressure. By mid-morning, families began to arrive, parking along the ranch's long, gravel drive. Tim watched from the barn door as vans and minivans unloaded children, some walking, some in wheelchairs, some holding tightly to parents' hands. Miss Hernandez and Maria greeted them, passing out name tags and gentle instructions. The therapy program was just a demonstration, but word had spread. Parents came with hope and uncertainty, and the children's faces glowed with a quiet excitement. Tim's heart thudded as he led Rusty from his stall. The old gelding's coat shone, copper bright, his steps steady. "You look like a champion," Tim whispered, squeezing Rusty's lead rope for courage. He led Rusty into the round pen where folding chairs had been set up, parents and kids settling in as if for a show. Unknown to Tim, Richard stood just beyond the barn's sliding door, his arms crossed, face like granite. He wanted to see this with his own eyes, ready to pull the plug the moment something went wrong. Miss Hernandez kicked things off, her voice warm and strong. "We're here today because sometimes the best therapy has 4 legs and a big heart. Rusty is a very special horse. He's not young, he's not perfect, but he has a gift." She caught Tim's eye and nodded. "Let's see what he can do." The first child was Ben, a shy boy with autism who rarely spoke outside of home. Ben clutched a soft brush, hiding behind his mother's legs. Tim knelt beside him, holding Ben's hand gently. "Rusty loves to be brushed. Would you like to try?" After a long pause, Ben took the brush and reached for Rusty's shoulder. The old horse stood rock still, lowering his head. Ben's motions were hesitant at first, then grew bolder as Rusty let out a deep sigh of contentment. Then something unexpected happened. Ben began to hum, a quiet, tuneless melody that grew louder as he brushed. His mother gasped, hands flying to her mouth. He never hums around new people." Tears streamed down her cheeks as Ben's focus stayed on Rusty, who seemed to understand the importance of every second. Next came Emily, the little girl from the first visit. Today, her face was lit up with anticipation, her hands steady on her wheelchair's tray. Miss Hernandez showed her how to hold out a treat, and Rusty bent his head with royal gentleness, lips tickling Emily's palm. She laughed, clear, bright, the sound ringing through the barn. Her mother snapped a photo, eyes shining with pride and relief. More children stepped forward. One boy with Down syndrome asked if he could walk Rusty. With Tim holding one side of the lead rope, they circled the pen together, the boy chattering away, Rusty's big ears flicking back to listen. A girl with a brace on her leg stood quietly as Rusty nuzzled her hair, her posture softening with every minute. Each interaction was its own tiny victory, a moment where the walls came down, where the old champion gave his courage and calm to someone who needed it most. As the demonstration went on, the mood shifted from skepticism to wonder. Parents whispered to each other, some dabbing at their eyes, others just shaking their heads in disbelief. The kids who were usually shy or withdrawn became animated, giggling and petting Rusty, telling him their secrets as if he could understand every word. Behind the crowd, Richard watched, expression dark and unreadable, but even he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. Rusty, once dismissed as a burden, was at the center of something beautiful, something powerful enough to draw out laughter from pain, hope from disappointment. A local reporter snapped photos, and a volunteer from the community center scribbled notes for a possible article. The session wrapped up with a circle of families around Rusty, Tim, and Miss Hernandez. Miss Hernandez spoke softly. There are many ways to win in life. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't measured by ribbons or trophies, but by moments like these. She looked at Richard, her gaze direct. With support, this could become something lasting. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then Ben's mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "Please, can we come back next week?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Tim felt his chest swell with pride and fear. He'd shown what was possible, but Richard's verdict still hung in the air. When the families finally left, Richard stayed behind, eyes hard on Tim. "You got your week, Tim," he said. "We'll see what happens next." As the sun dipped low and Tim walked Rusty back to his stall, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from hope. He'd risked everything and found something more valuable than any prize. The belief that second chances were real, and sometimes even a forgotten horse could change the world. If the old Carter Ranch had once felt like the loneliest place in Kentucky for an unwanted horse and a barely noticed stablehand, it didn't feel that way now. News of Rusty's remarkable therapy day didn't just trickle through the community. It exploded, carried by social media, word of mouth, and a front-page story in the local paper. Once forgotten Derby champ brings healing to kids. The next morning, Tim found his phone buzzing non-stop with calls and messages. Miss Hernandez texted him, "You'd better get ready. We're about to have a crowd." By noon, the ranch's main gate was packed with cars, parents, and curious neighbors. Local news crews set up cameras in the grass, their cables trailing through the wildflowers. People Tim didn't even know wandered up the lane, asking about the famous horse who changed the rules. Richard Carter, never one to ignore publicity, watched it all with a wary eye from his office window. He saw the donations coming in, checks from local businesses, envelopes full of small bills, and crayon-scrawled notes from children thanking Rusty for making me feel brave. The ranch accountant, bewildered but grinning, came in to show Richard a list of new donors. "This could really put us on the map, sir," he said. Richard just nodded, 1,000 thoughts racing behind his cold stare. But out in the paddocks, all that mattered to Tim was the kids. The next Saturday, the therapy group was 3 times as big. Ben, the boy who hummed, ran up to Rusty without hesitation. Emily arrived with her grandparents, showing them how to brush Rusty's neck just the way Miss Hernandez had taught her. Even a group of teenagers from the high school volunteered, leading horses, raking hay, setting up picnic tables. Maria shook her head, laughing. "Never thought I'd see this barn full of so many people who aren't betting on the horses." One boy, Jake, had always been quiet in the group. His father said he rarely spoke since a bad car accident. That day, Jake stood by Rusty, silent for a long time. Tim waited, patient, holding the lead rope loosely. Suddenly, Jake whispered, "Thank you, Rusty." His father choked back tears. It's the first thing he said in weeks. The barn felt like church then. Everybody holding their breath, grateful for a miracle. The community's response surprised even the old-timers. The hardware store owner sent over a load of lumber for new wheelchair ramps. A bakery dropped off trays of cookies for the kids. A group of local veterans asked if they could come by for therapy sessions of their own. One of the anchors from the evening news offered to film a special segment on the ranch's new mission. Even the county's surliest animal control officer showed up to see if the rumors were true. The buzz around Rusty drew old fans, too. People who'd once watched him thunder down the derby track, now standing quietly at the fence, hats in hand, remembering their own younger days. "Never thought I'd see him do something even better than winning the derby," one old man muttered, wiping his eyes as Rusty let a little girl braid flowers into his mane. The money was nice, but the real magic was how everyone changed. Tim found himself teaching other Stablehands how to help kids brush Rusty or guide them safely in the ring. Miss Hernandez brought new therapy tools and training, making the program more professional each week. Volunteers stayed late, cleaning stalls or repainting fences, trading stories about the old horse and his second act. Laughter and music echoed across the pastures where, not so long ago, there had only been silence. But not everything was easy. The crowds brought chaos. Parents worrying over their children, the noise and energy making some of the horses nervous. Tim had to play mediator, reassuring anxious parents, helping nervous horses settle, and making sure everyone remembered the ranch was a place for healing, not just a spectacle. Richard lurked in the background, still not smiling, but no longer issuing threats. He'd read the headlines, seen the donation numbers, and was starting to understand that Rusty's value couldn't be measured in stud fees or race results. Even Grant, who had once eyed Tim with suspicion, came by after hours to offer a hesitant handshake. "Didn't think you'd pull it off, kid," he said, grudging respect in his voice. "Guess I was wrong." What nobody saw were the moments between the events. When Tim sat alone in the quiet of the barn, Rusty's head resting on his shoulder. The horse who'd once seemed broken was now a lifeline for so many. Yet to Tim, he was still just Rusty, stubborn, gentle, and fiercely loyal. On the worst days, when the stress threatened to overwhelm him, Tim whispered, "We did it, old boy. No matter what anyone says, we did something good." One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red over the rolling fields, Tim and Miss Hernandez sat on the fence watching the last family leave. "You started all this, Tim," she said, her voice low. "You saw something nobody else did, not just in Rusty, but in yourself." Tim shook his head, a little embarrassed. "I just didn't want to give up. Not on him, not on these kids." She smiled, nodding. "That's what changes the world. One stubborn heart at a time." That night, a handwritten letter arrived at the ranch. No return address, just a message. "Thank you for giving my daughter her smile back." Tim read it 3 times, holding it tight like a medal he'd won. He folded it neatly, tucked it into his notebook, and promised himself he would never forget what hope, quiet, persistent, and a little bit reckless, could do. The next chapter was coming, and for the first time in his life, Tim was ready. If you'd asked anyone at Carter Ranch 6 months ago whether Richard Carter could ever change, you would have heard laughter echo across the fields. Richard's reputation had always been that of a man carved from stone, brilliant with money, ruthless with people, and colder than the limestone fences surrounding his estate. But the world has a way of wearing down even the hardest edges, especially when a horse like Rusty is involved. The community buzz around Rusty's therapy program wasn't just a passing trend. Local newspapers ran weekly features. TV crews arrived from out of state, turning the old ranch into a symbol of hope. Donations rolled in from all over, not just money, but supplies, equipment, and letters from families who wanted to share what the program meant to them. Every day, more children arrived, some limping, some silent, some clinging to their parents. Each of them left with something lighter in their step, a little more color in their cheeks. And at the center of it all stood Richard, watching with arms folded, a storm of conflict behind his eyes. The numbers in the ranch's accounts grew healthier. The brand, once fading, was now spoken of in reverent tones at the feed store and the county fair. But what Richard noticed most was what couldn't be measured: the way laughter echoed through the barn, the way parents hugged their children a little tighter when they thought no one was watching. One morning, after a particularly busy session, Richard found himself wandering the back paddock. He watched as Tim and Miss Hernandez helped a boy with cerebral palsy sit astride Rusty for the first time. The boy's father stood off to the side, wiping tears from his eyes, too overwhelmed to speak. Rusty stood absolutely still, eyes half closed, while the boy's shaky hands clung to his mane. There was a hush, like the world was holding its breath, until the boy let out a single joyous laugh that rang out across the field. Richard felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd worked hard to bury under contracts and profits for years. He remembered a time long ago when his own daughter had ridden her first pony, laughing in a way that made him forget about work for a few precious hours. That memory hit him so hard, it left him breathless. Later that day, Richard found Tim mucking out a stall. The old billionaire stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearing his throat. Tim froze, half expecting another lecture. But Richard just looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. "You did this," Richard said, voice low. "All of it. I tried to throw that horse away, and you turned him into the heart of this place." Tim straightened, bracing for bad news, but Richard shook his head. "I was wrong. About Rusty. About you. I let numbers blind me to what matters." He hesitated, a rare vulnerability showing through. "Thank you for not listening to me, for fighting for him, for all of them." That afternoon, Richard called a meeting in the big barn, something he hadn't done in years. All the ranch hands, volunteers, and families gathered in the aisle, the air buzzing with curiosity. Maria leaned over to Tim, whispering, "He never does this unless he's about to fire someone or hand out a bonus." Richard climbed up on a hay bale, looking out at the crowd. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying in the stillness. "When I started this ranch, I cared about winning, about breeding champions and collecting trophies. Somewhere along the line, I forgot about the rest. I forgot that real value isn't just about money or headlines. It's about what we give back." He glanced at Rusty, who stood beside Tim, ears flicking as if he understood every word. Rusty was a champion on the track, but what he's doing now, that's something none of us could have predicted. I'm proud to announce that this therapy program is now a permanent part of Carter Ranch. A ripple of applause swept through the crowd, but Richard raised a hand to quiet it. "And that's not all. Tim, you're being promoted to run this program. Miss Hernandez, you'll be our lead therapist, with all the support you need." The applause this time was thunderous, echoing through the rafters. Tim's face flushed with shock and joy, and Maria clapped him on the back so hard he nearly fell over. Miss Hernandez blinked back tears, shaking Richard's hand, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You won't regret this, sir. I promise." After the meeting, people lingered, talking in excited bursts. Families hugged the staff. Kids gathered around Rusty, petting him and slipping him treats. For the first time, the ranch felt like a home, warm, alive, full of possibility. Richard slipped outside, standing in the late afternoon light, watching the scene unfold. He thought about all the years he'd spent chasing the wrong kind of success. Maybe he'd been given a second chance too. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the barn quieted, Richard walked down to Rusty's stall. The old horse turned his head, dark eyes meeting Richard's without fear. Richard reached out, stroking Rusty's nose, the gesture awkward but sincere. "Thank you, old boy," he murmured. "You saved more than you know." Tim watched from the shadows, heart full. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be setbacks and new challenges, skeptics and hard days. But now they had Richard's support, and a whole community behind them. As the stars came out over Carter Ranch, it was clear. Everything had changed. Not just for Rusty and Tim, but for Richard, for every child who found hope, and for the ranch itself. For the first time in a long while, Carter Ranch was about more than racing. It was about healing. It was about second chances. And it was about love, the kind that changes everything. The transformation at Carter Ranch didn't just make headlines. It made history. As weeks turned into months, the story of the old champion and the stablehand who refused to quit became a quiet legend in Kentucky. People from all over sent letters and emails, some asking for a chance to visit, others simply sharing stories of their own lost causes, found hope, or unexpected second acts. The ranch, once known for its racing pedigree, was becoming famous for something far rarer: the belief that everyone deserves a shot at redemption. Richard Carter felt it every day as he walked the grounds. He still wore his crisp shirts and shined his boots, but now his gaze softened when he saw children in wheelchairs rolling down the old barn aisle, or volunteers laughing as they brushed Rusty's coat. There was something in the air that no amount of prize money had ever brought him: a sense of peace, a feeling that finally he was building something that would last. One afternoon, as summer rain rattled the tin roof, Richard invited Tim into his office. The old desk was still stacked with ledgers, but at the center sat a photo of Rusty with a group of smiling kids, front and center in the new program. Richard gestured to the chair across from him. Tim sat, a little nervous, wiping his hands on his jeans. For a long moment, Richard just studied him, the same way he might have once studied a yearling colt, looking for hidden potential. Then he spoke, his voice quieter than Tim had ever heard it. "You know, I used to think winning was everything. That's what my father taught me, and his father before him. Money, trophies, reputation, those were the only things that mattered. But you and Rusty, you proved me wrong." Tim listened, uncertain what to say, so Richard continued, his words deliberate. "It turns out some victories aren't measured in money or headlines. Sometimes the biggest win is seeing a kid laugh again, or watching a horse find his purpose after everyone else counted him out." He looked up, meeting Tim's eyes. "Thank you for teaching me something I should have learned a long time ago." Tim let out a shaky breath, relief and pride mingling in his chest. "I just wanted to give Rusty a chance, and maybe give myself one too." Richard nodded. "You've done more than that. You've given this ranch a new name, one people respect for the right reasons." After that day, Tim found himself with new responsibilities and a new sense of confidence. Richard formally introduced him to the staff as the director of the therapy program. Miss Hernandez took the lead on medical protocols, but it was Tim's compassion and patience that set the tone for the team. He started mentoring the new Stablehands, most of them kids not much younger than he was. Some came from tough backgrounds, quiet and wary, expecting to be judged. Tim welcomed them with open arms, teaching not just how to feed and groom, but why every animal and every person deserved dignity. He told them the story of Rusty's second chance, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that nobody's value was set in stone. The program kept growing. With Richard's blessing, Tim and Miss Hernandez opened sessions for veterans, seniors, and anyone in the county who needed a safe place to heal. The barn doors were open wider than ever before, and people who once felt invisible now found a home under the old wooden beams. One day, Tim watched as a new group of stable-hands gathered around Rusty. One young man, Jason, confessed he'd never even touched a horse before. Tim smiled, showing him how to approach Rusty slowly, how to talk to him and watch his ears. When Jason's hand finally settled on Rusty's neck, the old horse stood patient and steady, and Jason grinned as if he'd just conquered Everest. Later, as Tim led a group through the barn, he paused at a wall newly decorated with photos, smiling kids, volunteers, even skeptical old-timers who now beamed with pride. "Compassion over competition," Tim told the group, repeating the lesson he'd learned from Rusty. "That's what sets us apart. That's why people trust us now." The ranch's reputation spread far beyond Kentucky. Magazines ran features about the Derby champ who healed a town. Other ranches called, asking Tim for advice on starting their own therapy programs. Richard found himself fielding invitations to speak at conferences, not about racing, but about community and inclusion. It was a change nobody could have predicted, but everyone could feel. In quiet moments, Tim sometimes walked out to the far paddock alone, Rusty at his side. He'd watch the sunset over the rolling hills, listening to the distant laughter from the barn, the steady rhythm of horses grazing. The ranch felt different now, softer, kinder, full of possibility. Richard joined him one evening, both men leaning against the fence, watching the sky fade from blue to gold. "Funny," Richard mused. "I used to think legacies were built on trophies. Turns out, they're built on second chances." Tim smiled, and on believing in what others might give up on. That summer, the ranch held its first open house for the community. Hundreds came, families, teachers, old friends, and new faces. Children rode Rusty and the other therapy horses. Artists painted murals in the hayloft. Musicians played bluegrass on the porch. At the end of the day, Richard raised a toast, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Here's to champions who run, and to champions who give others a reason to hope." The cheers echoed through the evening air, full of gratitude and pride. Carter Ranch had become something new. Not just a place where races were won, but a place where hearts could heal. And that was a victory worth more than any prize. The day of the Carter Ranch Community Celebration dawned bright and golden, the sun lighting up every blade of grass and every red barn plank, as if the world itself wanted to mark the occasion. Tim stood at the edge of the main paddock, watching the guests arrive. A steady flow of families, children, ranch hands, teachers, reporters, old-timers, and newcomers. Some came with walking sticks, some with wheelchairs, others carrying homemade signs and trays of cookies. What united them was a sense of belonging, a feeling that this ranch was their home too. The atmosphere buzzed with more than just excitement. It felt like gratitude. Volunteers decorated the fences with wildflowers and hand-painted banners. A group of teenagers painted kids' faces with horseshoes and stars. The barbecue sizzled, and the barn filled with music, someone strumming a banjo, laughter mixing with the notes. At the center of it all stood Rusty, his copper coat gleaming, surrounded by children eager to stroke his nose and feed him apples. He wore a wreath of blue ribbons and sunflowers around his neck, regal as ever, a living symbol of hope and transformation. As the celebration unfolded, Tim found himself busy helping everywhere at once. He showed first-time visitors how to greet the horses, helped the smallest children find their courage for a gentle ride, checked in on the volunteers, and always made sure Rusty got a few extra treats. Miss Hernandez floated through the crowd, answering questions, demonstrating therapy techniques, and quietly comforting nervous parents. Maria led the kitchen crew, beaming as she passed out lemonade and pie, joking with guests like she'd known them all her life. Mid-afternoon, the community gathered in the big barn, now decked out for a ceremony. Hay bales became benches, a wooden platform served as a stage, and the ranch's new banner hung overhead. Carter Ranch, a place for second chances. The air was thick with anticipation as Richard Carter walked to the front, no longer the distant billionaire, but a neighbor, a mentor, and at last, a friend. Richard looked out over the sea of faces. His voice was steady, warm. "I started this ranch thinking it would be my legacy. Races won, trophies collected. But I was wrong. My real legacy is all of you, what we've built together. The stories, the laughter, the hope I see here. That's worth more than anything money can buy." He turned to Tim, who stood beside Rusty. "This young man reminded me that true champions aren't just those who cross the finish line first, but those who give others a reason to hope." He saw value where others saw none. And with the help of Rusty, Miss Hernandez, and every person here, he's helped this ranch become a home for everyone. The crowd applauded, the sound rolling through the rafters. Richard continued, announcing the creation of the Carter Scholarship Fund, a program to support therapy work and ensure that kids from every background could benefit, regardless of their family's means. The barn erupted in cheers, some people hugging, others wiping away tears. Tim stepped onto the stage, his hands trembling only a little. He looked at the faces before him, so many he now knew by name, and spoke from the heart. "I used to think I was just a stablehand, but Rusty showed me that we're all more than what people expect. Sometimes the greatest champions are the ones who give others a reason to get up in the morning, who believe in the lost and the broken, even when nobody else will." He paused, seeing Emily and Ben and the other kids beaming up at him. None of this would have happened without everyone here. The lesson I've learned, the one Rusty taught me, is that the world can change when you give kindness, patience, and a little hope. Sometimes the best investment you can make is believing in what everyone else has written off. As Tim finished, a hush fell over the crowd. Then Emily, now walking with a cane but standing tall, called out, "Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Rusty." The children surged forward, hugging Tim, petting Rusty, some even draping their medals and ribbons around the old horse's neck. The celebration stretched into the evening. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, families danced under the open sky, music rising above the fields. The old fears of loss, of being forgotten, of never measuring up, seemed to drift away, replaced by the certainty that Carter Ranch truly was a place for second chances. Later, as the guests departed and the stars came out, Tim walked through the quiet barn, checking on each horse, pausing at Rusty's stall. He leaned against the door, whispering, "We did it, old boy. We really did it." Rusty snuffled softly, his head resting on Tim's shoulder. Outside, Richard stood by the paddock, watching the last cars drive away, Maria beside him. "Never thought I'd see the day," Maria said, her voice full of pride. Richard smiled, his face softer than ever. Sometimes it just takes one stubborn soul to believe in what the world's thrown away. As Tim joined them under the stars, he felt something settle inside him, a sense of peace, of purpose, and of gratitude. Carter Ranch was no longer just a patch of land or a business. It was a legacy, built on kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage to lift others up. And as the night grew quiet, the lesson of Rusty and Tim remained. True champions aren't just measured by what they win, but by the hope they give, the lives they touch, and the love they leave behind. Thank you for listening to our story. If it moved you, don't forget to like and follow the channel, because everyone deserves a second chance, and every story of hope deserves to be shared.